We got a lot that's going on. If you aren't aware of it, Friday starts our a cappella jubilee, and we'll be singing some new songs on Friday night starting at 7 o'clock. And those videos, if you haven't checked the Central Family stuff, some of those newer songs we posted on YouTube today or yesterday, something like that, so you can listen to some of those. And then Saturday at 4, any of you guys with young families, you guys are invited to come to our house afterwards, me and Megan's house, after Saturday night's thing at 4. And then Sunday we'll do a praise service. We've also got summer series right around the corner, VBS right around the corner. You've got a graduation party on June the 2nd, I believe. So there's a lot that's going on. Please make sure you're checking family news and notes and all those things. And then the Callgroves are moving in. Still the plan is Saturday morning at 9. So if you can help with that, we'd love to have you there. And that address is out there on the sheet. Anything else I'm missing? That's a slew of stuff really fast. Yeah, good luck keeping up with it. All right, before we start, let's pray together. Dear Heavenly Father, as always, we just thank you so much for opportunities like this to study your word together. We love you. We thank you for all of these just teachable moments and readings of this book of Nehemiah and the application that we can make to our lives. And we just pray that these not be things that we're just listening to or reading or anything like that, but truly making some application and change to our life for the better to draw closer to you. We love you and pray that you'd bless our time here together tonight. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. All right. So just got asked about whether or not we were going to finish Nehemiah, and I promise you that we will. We're going to try to cover chapter 11 and 12 tonight. If you read, which I hope that you did, you read a laundry list of names, a whole bunch of names. So we're not going to dive all into all of those names, but rather pick some spots as we've been trying to do to make some application to us. Next week we'll read through and go through chapter 13. And then our last week together, before the quarter changes, we're going to kind of do a review of everything. So what I'd like for you to do between now and our last week together, so now and 2 weeks away, is if you have any questions or things from the book that you would like covered more in detail, you can text me those things, or you can bring them up in that class, make note of it, leave a note on my desk. Whatever you want to do so that we can handle and talk about some of those things. We don't always get to cover everything all in detail and in depth. So we'd like to do that with our last week. So where we left off last week, and last week we looked at the end of chapter 9 and then chapter 10. We had in chapter 9, what is all of chapter 9 for the most part? What is that made up of? What are they doing there in chapter 9? Say it again. Okay, confessing their sins, and it's the longest prayer that's recorded in all of the Bible in chapter 9, and a lot of it is them through prayer pointing back to their history. And then what we see at the end of that chapter, which is where we started last week, is this in verse 38, that because of all of this, which is everything that was in that prayer, they're making this firm covenant in writing. And so they're making this promise and this vow there in verse 38. So we talked about how serious it was for them. There's nothing haphazard about this. It's nothing that's just like rote. I mean, it's very serious. So much so that they're going to attach their names to it. And that's what we see in the beginning of chapter 10. So you see all those names that are listed at the beginning of chapter 10. Those are all the names of the people that signed this sealed document. But then what we see is kind of what's included in this promise or this vow or this covenant in chapter 10. And so one of the first things that they say they're going to do is what? What is the first thing they say they're going to do? It's on the screen. What? Okay, join with their brothers. Keep reading. At the end, what are they going to do? Okay, do all the commandments of the Lord. So they're going to go back to the book. We talked about how important, y'all were here last week, right? Everybody? Okay, just making sure. So they're going to go back to the book. They're going to make that the most important thing. And then the next thing that we see, this one's easy because I put the word there for you. What are they going to do next but place a priority on their home, right? So they say that, we're done intermarrying. We're going to place a premium on the home. They knew that over time their Achilles heel really was intermarrying, and so therefore getting away from that first part we just looked at. All right, and then verse 31, what you see is them going back to the Jewish calendar, so to speak, keeping the Sabbath, the Jubilee year, all the things. And then we saw in 32 through 39, what's the importance they place here? On the house of God. And they conclude all of that by saying, we will not neglect the house of our God. So we're going to see if they really actually follow through with this promise and this vow. Now, I told you last week, right before we closed, that as we get into chapter 11, these first two verses are, I would say, my two favorite verses in all of the book of Nehemiah. And we're going to look at why here in just a minute by way of application. And then chapter 12, there's a key verse in chapter 12. Those are going to be really three verses tonight are going to be a lot of our focus. So before we look at chapter 11, I want you to turn back to chapter 7. Because I also told you that in order to really get a handle on the first two verses of chapter 11, we've got to know some chapter 7, 7:11. Like that? So here we go. Let me read the first four verses of Nehemiah chapter 7. It says, when the wall had been built, and I had set up the doors, and the gatekeepers, the singers, and the Levites had been appointed, and I gave my brother Hanani and Hananiah, the governor of the castle, charge over Jerusalem, for he was a more faithful and God-fearing man than many. And I said to them, let not the gates of Jerusalem be opened until the sun is hot. And while they are still standing guard, let them shut and bar the doors. Appoint guards from among the inhabitants of Jerusalem, some at their guard posts and some in front of their own homes. The city, here's the key part I want you to see. The city was wide and large, but the people within it were few, and no houses had been rebuilt. So you tell me, what does that look like exactly? What are you picturing inside the walls based on what we just read in chapter 7? Okay, desolation. What else comes to mind? What? Okay, ruins still, potentially. All right, so maybe some crumbs left over. What else? Not much what? Yeah. Really people in places of position, right? And so that's key with where we're about to read and pick up in chapter 11. So you've got these walls that have been rebuilt. They've been restored, but there's just not a whole lot going on inside. It's still pretty abandoned for the most part. And so why is that even important? Why is it important? Go ahead, Richard. Yeah, so it's not enough just for the walls to be rebuilt. It's not enough for there to be this rejuvenation or this revival, I guess we've called it, within the people. Now they're concerned with getting people into the city and bringing them together. And so for a city to prosper and be great, we know this, right? It can't just be rebuilt or built altogether. What do you need to actually make a city? You need people. And so that's what they're after here. It has to be populated. And so for For the 70 years while in captivity, Jerusalem is this ghost town of a place, right? And so over a period of time, for the most part, it's kind of been repopulated. We see it in the book of Ezra with people rebuilding the temple, and then now here, especially as you go back to chapter 3, and people rebuilding the wall, but the city still needs more people. Now, I'm convinced, as you go back to a lot of what we read in the beginning of our study, that one of the main reasons they needed people is still because who's out there? Who is the opposition? You remember those guys? Give me some names. Go ahead, Steve. Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem. You still got opposition out there, and I'm just going to tell you. I mean, you can't fight without people. Like, should that come their way, you got to have some people, and so. I think that's a part of the reason why you would want people there as well. So let's look at chapter 11, beginning there in verse 1. It says, "Now the leaders of the people lived in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring 1 out of 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while 9 out of 10 remained in other towns." Now, if we just put our focus right here first, why is this important? Why is it important that the leaders, for the most part, it appears, go first? And they're the ones that sign on to live in this abandoned, nothing, hustling and bustling kind of place. Why is that important? Okay, needed some stability. All right, why else? Okay, there you go. That's exactly right. I mean, like, these are the ones that are setting the example for everything else that's about to unfold. Now, I'd also point out here, like, if you ever, in a position of leadership, have you ever tried to get someone else to do something that you yourself would not touch with a 10-foot pole? So you tell me, how does that work out? What's that? Yeah, it doesn't work out really well. So leaders have to be the ones that are setting the pattern by the way they live and what they do. And so, I think for the most part, what we see here, they had no right to try to repopulate the city with all these people if they themselves are not willing to live in the city. And so I think of, we see some of this, as you fast forward into the New Testament with Jesus, right? By way of who is the greatest. You remember the disciples asked that question? And he says, well, it's those of you that do as I do, right? It's those of you that serve. It's those of you that set the example. John chapter 13, when he bends down and he washes their feet, you remember how they questioned that? Why are you washing my feet? And he says, well, I want you to emulate me. I want you to do as I have done here. So emulate me. How do you even know what it looks like? How do you even know what to emulate if nobody's done it? And so, like, that's a lot of what we see here. And I would say most especially with Jesus doing things that no one else was doing. Now, that's the path that's less traveled, isn't it, nowadays? That's the path that no one really wants to take, is to take that low spot. I'm not going to lie, I would rather, I'm sure you would too, I would rather my foot be washed. I'd rather someone come rub my feet, not the other way around. That's the way we feel nowadays. And so I think there's a big lesson in there, going anywhere in Scripture, that, being the kind of people that serve and set the example. And that's the gist of what we see here in Nehemiah, like doing the very thing that I desire others to do. So any comments here on these leaders or this first spot in chapter 11, verse 1? Okay, so the second group of people come in by way of chance, a lottery system. Like, that's how they come. So did these people have a choice in the matter? Because it appears, though, they had a choice in the matter. Hello? Okay. Yep. Right. Yeah. No, I think that for the most part, there was some voluntelling, more so than them being willing because of what we're going to see in verse 2. And so, I mean, the way this reads to me, or from what I can gather, they've cast their names into a lottery system of sorts, and you've got 1 out of every 10 that are going into the city. 9 out of the 10 are staying where they're at or staying outside. Jason? Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna, yeah, yeah, change it. Yeah, yeah. Well, we're going to talk a lot about that, especially with this next group. Because you have these leaders. I think they had like a special obligation to go. And then these, it appears though they're obligated to go. But then what you really have is something really awesome and cool. As we read in verse 2, the people blessed all the men who willingly offered to live in Jerusalem. And these had a special kind of blessing. So if such a blessing was reserved for these that volunteered and willingly went, does that not tell you something about how not easy this was to actually do this, right? And so I think that we've got to understand that. Like, this is not something that we see in verse 2 that they're signing up and saying, yeah, this is fun. Or, yeah, this is easy. Or, yeah, this is something I would love to do. This is a big change. Now, what's even more interesting is that these guys are blessed. Now, I don't really know what all that looks like, but I do know that we don't have any of their names. None of them are named. Now, as you look at the rest of the chapter, what you do see are all the ones that are named with a title and with a role. And for sake of me not butchering names, I'm not going to read through all those. But you can read all the way through verse 20, all the way through verse 20, and then through the end of the chapter, you have those that are in charge of some things but are living outside of the city still. And I don't want to skip over these by way of saying they're not important. I want you to know they're very important. But the lesson that I think we can get is really here in verse 2, these that volunteered. And so to volunteer, sign up and say, send me, I'll go, as Jason was just saying, is not something that's easy. So they're leaving entirely, just like we would, our place of work, our place of business. What else are you leaving behind when you move? Friends, yeah, you're changing over entirely and leaving friends behind. You're changing over from, I don't know, all these kind of things that you were doing. And then to live in Jerusalem, I'm assuming through all the opposition that we were focused on so much at the beginning of the book, that you also knew, these also knew, that moving into Jerusalem meant that they were going to be a part of being a target of the very enemy that we've been learning about all this time. So yeah, sign me up for that. Anybody on board? I mean, it's unbelievable. I think that what these guys are doing. And so I don't think we We can't forget that, did Sanballat and Tobiah, did they just disappear when the walls were rebuilt? No, they didn't just go away. They're still there. And so I think, as we look at this verse a little more in detail, whatever and wherever it is, we need to be the kind of people that are willingly offering to do some things that no one else wants to do. Be willing to do that. And then on top of that, be willing to do it in such a way that I don't need to be named. I don't need the spotlight. I don't need the applause. I'm doing it because I feel I need to do it. Cam, are you going to say something? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What you're saying reminds me of the guy who the book is named after. Someone that's all in, someone that's willing to be there and stay there, not leave, and be that guy, right? I mean, honestly, if we go all the way back to Nehemiah, could anybody in here say that Nehemiah did anything that he did from verse 1 to where we are now? He did it for the spotlight. He did it for the applause. He did it for the recognition. He did it so that a book of the Bible was named after him. Why can we not say that? How do you know that? What's that? By his actions. Everything that we've read leading up to this point. So I think it's, really so much of his response to everything throughout, the humility, the submission, the obedience to God. But all that to say, I think sometimes we need reminders like Hebrews chapter 6 and verse 10 that, hey, man, like not everyone has to see everything that you're doing. Because guess who does? God sees every labor that's done in love. And then on top of that, the spotlight or the applause or anything of that nature cannot be the thing that motivates us to go and to do that thing. We see it, I think, as well in Matthew chapter 6. Jesus says, beware of practicing your righteousness before other people in order to be seen by them or applauded by them or to have the spotlight on you. For then you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. He goes on in that chapter to talk about prayer and talk about fasting and talk about giving and doing those things in such a way that your Father sees what's done in secret, and because of that, he will reward you. So many of us are gifted in an area that doesn't reach the spotlight, doesn't get posted on social media, doesn't get applause, and yet still understand the value of doing that very thing. Many years ago, and I don't know which of my siblings were with us, but my parents took us on a trip up like Arlington, Washington, D.C., seeing all these historical places. It was really boring at the time. Not going to lie. But I do now, today, appreciate that we went to one place. And I remember before we went to this place that my parents were telling us all, like you got to be on your best behavior. And you got to show a ton of reverence. And you can't act like an idiot. That probably came from my dad. He probably said a donkey or mule or something like that. But seriously, sit still, behave yourself, appreciate what you're seeing. And that place was the tomb of the unknown soldier. And we got to see the changing of the guard. And again, I fully understand everything that I was witnessing, but so appreciate now what I did witness and have seen with my eyes. Now, the cool part about what you're looking at right here is that in this area of our country are tons of monuments and statues and plaques and all kinds of things, and they're all named after a man or a woman, and they actually have a name attached to it, like the Washington Monument or the Lincoln Memorial, some of those places. But this one right here is only for the unknown and therefore unnamed, no name attached to it, soldiers. So while their specific names aren't listed anywhere, does that change any of the importance of what they did? Absolutely not. Why not? Why not? Because of their sacrifice. Yeah, what they did, right? And not so to be named. And actually, I don't know how well you can see that. Can you see the inscription? What's that? Yeah, so if you can't see the inscription, it reads, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known only to God." That is like so cool. Jason, and then Jerry, do you have your hand up? No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so, so did these men who fought for our freedom do so to be named? Did Nehemiah do anything he's done to be named? Do these in verse 2, did they do this to be named? And I think that sometimes, as you take the Bible as a whole, we can get really stuck on the big names of the Bible. But there's one list that comes to my mind in Hebrews chapter 11, where you see a lot of those big time names, right? We call it the Hall of Faith or the Heroes of Faith. But do you recall what's at the end of that chapter? You have this list of all of these that are unknowns for the most part. Let me read you some of these. The Hebrew writer says, for sake of time, he can't tell of all the ones. But he does go on to say, there are others that were stoned, that experienced mockings, beatings, imprisonment, sawn in two, tempted, put to death, destitute, afflicted, ill-treated, wandered in deserts and mountains and caves, and lived in holes in the ground. Now, does that make them any different than any of those that were listed and were named in Hebrews chapter 11? No. And that's the whole point here. I mean, these that did things, I think the lesson for us, again, is not to do things we do for the spotlight or for some kind of recognition, which is really hard to do nowadays with social media. Yes? Because I want to tell you about all the good things that I'm doing. And it's super easy to post about all these things that my kids have achieved and done. It's super hard to do what we're talking about today. Yes? Now, should we brag on our kids? Should we talk about ourselves a little bit? Yeah, you need to know some stuff. But, we're talking about things that nobody should really see. We need to leave those things in secret. Do you have any comments on these two verses? That's really the meat, I think, of what we can take in chapter 11. Anybody else here? Great. Super talkative tonight, guys. I appreciate it. All right, so chapter 12. So I'm going to put this in front of you. In verses 1 through 26, we've got really some more names. All of these that are listed in verses 1 through 26 are those that are priestly, those of the Levitical families. Not going to spend time going through all of those, but rather read verses 27 through the end of the chapter and this dedication of the wall that you're going to see. And so I put this wall illustration up here for you. If you see, not that you have to read all those or be able to see them, as long as you see that big red blob right there in the middle. Because really what you're going to see are them preparing to celebrate and then celebrating, and then afterwards making some arrangements so that this can continue. That's the gist of what you're going to see. So as we read through this, the starting point is that red dot. One group, as Nehemiah splits them off, is going to go one way, so you can follow that red brick road, and then the yellow brick road down the other side. And what you're going to see them do is go down each side, and then they're going to meet at the house of God, which is indicated at the top in the yellow. And that's where they're really going to, cut loose, let go, and worship and do all those things. So let's read. Show me some grace on some of these names, all right? Verse 27, and at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites. Again, this verse 27. Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgivings, and with singing, with cymbals, with harps and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the districts surrounding Jerusalem and from the villages of the Netophathites, also from Beth Gilgal and from the region of Geba and Asmaveth, for the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem. And the priests and the Levites purified themselves, and they purified the people and the gates and the wall. Then I brought the leaders of Judah up onto the wall and appointed two great choirs that gave thanks. So here it is. One went to the south on the wall to the dung gate. And then after them went Hoshea and half of the leaders of Judah, and Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah, and certain of the priests' sons with trumpets, Zechariah, the son of Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, son of Mattaniah, son of Micaiah, son of Zakur, son of Asaph, and his relatives, Shemaiah, Azarel, Milalai, Gilalai, Mai, Nathanael, Judah, and Hanani, with the musical instruments of David, the man of God. And Ezra, the scribe, went before them. Verse 37, at the fountain gate, they went up straight before them by the stairs of the city of David, at the ascent of the wall, above the house of David, to the water gate on the east. The other choir, those who gave thanks, went to the north, and I followed them with half of the people on the wall, above the tower of the ovens to the broad wall, and above the gate of Ephraim, by the gate of Yeshana, and by the fish gate, and the tower of Hananel, and the tower of the 100, to the sheep gate, and they came to a halt at the gate of the guard. So both choirs of those who gave thanks stood in the house of God, and I and half of the officials with me, and the priests, Eliakim, Maaseiah, Minimin, Micaiah, Elonai, Zechariah, and Hananiah with trumpets, and Messiah, Shemaiah, Eleazar, Uzi, Johanan, Malchijah, Elam, and Ezer. And the singers sang with Jezariah as their leader. And they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. On that day, men were appointed over the storerooms, the contributions, the first fruits, and the tithes, to gather into them the portions required by the law for the priests and for the Levites, according to the fields of the towns. For Judah rejoiced over the priests and the Levites who ministered, and they performed the service of their God and the service of purification, as did the singers and the gatekeepers, according to the command of David and his son Solomon. For long ago, in the days of David and Asaph, there were directors of the singers, and there were songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. And all Israel in the days of Zerubbabel and in the days of Nehemiah gave the daily portions for the singers and the gatekeepers. And they set apart that which was for the Levites, and the Levites set apart that which was for the sons of Aaron. Whew. So what do you got? Anything jump out to you in this reading? Hopefully you followed all that. Yeah, and that it was kind of an assigned role, right? Yeah. Anybody else? Anything jump out at you in this chapter? The whole, yeah, I mean, all these guys that are listed, I mean, it's for the most part it's everybody, right? And so what they're doing, I think, and what you're talking about at the end, is they're setting things in order so that this doesn't go to waste, this doesn't stop, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, they all, I think what's so cool, is how they, I mean, they're not marching around the wall. Where are they? They're on top of the wall, and one group's marching one way, one group's marching the other way, not marching, but walking. And then as they get to the place, send your eyes back to verse 43. In verse 43, whoa, that's not right. Yeah, oh well, we can read it here. Verse 43 says, they offered great sacrifices that day and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced, and the joy of Jerusalem was heard far away. Now, you know, that's like the only part in this chapter, I think, that just really jumped out at me, and you're going to hear some more of this on Sunday for Acapella Jubilee. I'm going to talk some about this Sunday morning. But how cool is that? Like, you've already looked at chapter 7. We've seen all that they've been through, all that's gone on. The situation that they're in, while it's good right now, I don't think that it would move me in such a way to be that full of joy. And yet that's exactly what they are. I want you to look at this one more time. On that day, they offered great sacrifices and rejoiced, for God had made them rejoice with great joy. The women and children also rejoiced, and the singing of Jerusalem was heard from afar. Does your version say that? Does it say the singing? The joy. So they're singing and they're playing instruments, but what is it that's actually heard from afar? The joy. How cool is that? Like, what does that even mean to us? So what was heard from afar, I take that to mean is not just singing and not just these instruments that they were playing, but they are so happy. What they heard was so happy. And we read that, where did it all start? Who gave that joy to them? God. But I want you to also consider where else that joy probably came from. You think any of it came from Nehemiah? You think Nehemiah on this day was stuck at the bottom and cowed away in a corner? No. He set the example and he set the standard. You think he's right there in the mix, you better believe it. And so I think, you know, if we're the kind of people, as it applies to us, if we're the kind of people that, like, what's been promised for us is getting closer and closer and closer, how in the world can we spend our days being completely miserable? That God has given us, especially in this great country that we get to live in, and all the blessings that we have. Like, God has given every single one of us reason for great joy. And we got a serious, serious issue if we're unable to show that joy. It's a big deal. And so that's I also find it really stinking awesome that you see kids in this picture. Do you think they're joyful? And how would they know to be joyful on this occasion? Because the adults are joyful. What does that mean to us? Like, remember in chapter 8 where you saw everybody crying? And we talked about how that's contagious. Like, we just saw that on Sunday, did we not, with Michaela? Like, I was standing up here. I got to see everybody. Miss Kay was bawling tears, and guess what all you other women were doing? Crying too. But in the same way that kind of emotion is contagious, guess what else is? Joy and happy and smiling. Like it's a big deal, especially with kids. I had a teacher in college that said something that always resonated with me in regards to teaching. He said this, I wrote it down, I've always kept it in a place, especially when I was teaching. The key to happy students is to first be happy yourself. Teachers, would you agree with that? That's one of the first places you have to start. And for those of you that don't know, I taught intensive reading in middle school and high school for about 9 years. And if there's one thing, whether you've been a teacher and you've been in education or not, everybody here knows that most teenagers don't like to do what? Read. So not only did I have that, but I also had kids that they said, you have to take this class. And so I knew that really, honestly, most of my job was not getting these kids to read better. What was really my job? To motivate them to actually do something or do anything. And so I think sometimes that being the adults that we are, we've got to be able to put some other stuff off to the side for a minute. And sometimes, let that be off in the distance for just a minute and let your kids see you joyful and see you happy. Jared, and then I'll come back to you, Nate. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and in the context of that, anybody found or had that fight with their kids about coming to church? Like they don't want to come and they wrestle about it. Well, one of the ways to combat that, I would guess, would be for me myself, right? To do what? To be happy and be excited about going. And what do you think that'll do with my kids? Potentially the same thing as Jared's talking about, passing that on to the next generation. Again, I think that sometimes no matter what's going on in your life, you've got to have those moments where you push those things aside and you choose joy. It's necessary, Nate. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that's it's pretty cool to think about how loud that would have been, what it actually would have sounded like. But I think that we should all be in the business through our daily lives of encouraging each other. And you tell me, how do you encourage someone? How do you edify someone? How do you lift someone up if no one's ever seen you smile? How does that happen if every time someone comes to talk to you, you are not okay? You know what I mean? How do we do that? I think it's I hate to beat it, but it's so sad. Do we even understand what we have to look forward to? And that alone should be enough to give me some joy or give me a smile. So anything else you got on that? Like Miss Linnell brought up the a cappella jubilee. I mean, after prepping for this, I've been praying that the joy is heard from afar, that maybe we can open the doors and we'll have some passerbys come walking in because they can hear how loud and how proud and how happy and joyful we truly are about singing. How cool would that be, right? So maybe we'll do that. Might get a little warm, but Jerry, say it again. Yeah. 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 Would have carried. Yeah. So we need to have the a cappella jubilee on the roof. Yeah. We'll just, can we punch a hole? No. Uh, no. Let's go, Nate. Yeah. You bring the bricks. Everybody, yeah. No, I'll stop there. Anybody, anything else? Yeah. 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 We have the choice in that, right? Yeah. Very good. All right. We'll do chapter 13 next week again. Just a reminder, 2 weeks from now.